And on this show, we love our relationship with money. We compare relationships that people have with money, either to fiat money or Bitcoin, and we contrast those relationships. So what we do is we take mainstream media news stories and filter them through either a Bitcoin standard lens or a fiat standard lens. And we come up with some contrasts and some conclusions and some results. And that's why we put this whole show in the context of a relationship and why we call it The Breakup, because it really is about ending a relationship and starting something new. So mainstream media stories today. I got a really fun one to start off. Did anyone see Ryan Selkis on Tucker Carlson last night? Probably the most prominent appearance by a Bitcoin crypto related person on any cable news show in the United States. So Ryan Selkis was there to push his Digital Freedom Alliance, which sounds great. So congratulations to Ryan Selkis and everyone who's involved in that. Sounds like it could be a real help. There was another story on Tucker Carlson for those who might not have seen it, and it covered a guy named Mark Carney. Mark Carney. I worked with him for a little while, so I have a bit of insight here, and I'm going to share it for you today. So Mark Carney is probably the most prominent person of this clown world meme that we all talk about, and I'll explain that in a second. I also come up with some remedies on how to deal with this guy, so stay tuned for those. But first, what did he do? Why was he on Tucker Carlson last night, right? So he was on Tucker Carlson last night because he wrote a story for a newspaper called the Globe and Mail. So if you don't know what a newspaper is, it's like a paper thing, and they got news stories in it, and you can read them all, and it's supposed to have them all for the day. And so one of the biggest ones in Canada is this thing called the Globe and Mail. And so he wrote an article for the Globe and Mail, and I'll read you the title because it's amazing, right? It's time to end the sedition in Ottawa by enforcing law and following the money. That's what we do on the show. We follow the money, right? We like to follow the money. Who's got the money? Why do they have the money? Where does it come from? So Mark Carney says, follow the money. Now, who is Mark Carney? Why is he writing the Globe and Mail? And if you don't know about Mark Carney, let's do a quick lesson on Mark Carney. So Mark Carney used to be at Goldman Sachs in the early 2000s. Then apparently he saw a job offer in the Economist magazine to be the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, and wrote in, and they're like, who's this guy? He's great. Let's give him the governorship. So he became the governor of the Bank of Canada. And that's where I intersected with him. So in the Senate Banking Committee where I worked, he took his position as governor of Bank of Canada right during the financial crisis. And Canada sort of came out really well of the 2008 financial crisis. And a lot of people look to Canadian banking as an example of how to avoid the excesses of the American system. So it became sort of a really cool, prominent, hip thing to say, oh, wow, conservative Canadian banking really got it right. And so he became sort of the poster child for this in this governorship position. We would ask him a lot about what he was going to do for the Greek debt crisis at the time. And the members of the committee took it seriously. And he's super articulate, really can speak precisely about things. So he would have to come statutorily to the committee twice a year and give his economic update. We would all, I would help craft questions for the senators. Within that job, he ended up taking over the presidency of something called the BIS. That's the Bank for International Settlements. It's a Swiss central bank set up after World War I to be the central bank of central banks. So the banks themselves need a bank account, right? So I told you when I worked with Kraken, I helped set up their account with the Federal Reserve. Not help set it up, but scope out what it was, right? I got the client manual, this is how you get onboarded to the Federal Reserve. It's absurd, right? But the central banks also have a bank. I haven't seen their UX UI, but it must be something else. So the BIS is in Switzerland, and he became the chair of that as well. And then from there, he was such a celebrity that they made him the exchequer, I guess they call it, but it's kind of like the chairman, or it's kind of like the Jay Powell president of the Fed position, but for the Bank of England. Right. So he left Canada to go to the Bank of England, sort of an upgrade situation. Right. So this Canadian guy came in and became the governor of the Bank of England. So he did all these things. What he was really known for in all of these efforts, and why they kept him around so many years, is because he was in charge of something called the Basel III Accords. The Basel III Accords are a series of agreements between all the major banks in the world. And this was getting worked on when I was, when he was at the Bank of Canada, and I was on that committee working as a researcher. And so this stuff came through all the time. The point of Basel III, just the TLDR of it, banks have to have money so they don't have a run on the bank. They have to have capital requirements, right? That's the main gist of it. They need capital requirements and liquidity provisions so they don't do what the American subprime mortgage situation led us to, which is lend out too much money, and then theoretically you could have a run on the banks. So they set up this whole big reporting system, right, to prevent any form of collapse of this system. So he's a major architect of all banking regulatory infrastructure. Since he left the Bank of England a few years ago, he went to the COPA 26 or 7 or whatever. It's some kind of environmental agreement where they, bring all kinds of policymakers together and sort of decide on where to invest, what to invest in for environmental stuff. He was also the UN negotiator for this on the part of England. So they sent him to be like their UN environmental investment guy. And then he went to an asset manager as well called Brookfield Asset Management. So they've got about $500 billion. Hold on, all of these prefixes are going to be important in a second. $500 billion in assets under management related to green energy stuff, wind, solar, hydro, all that kind of stuff. He's also a writer of a book called Value, and they put the S with the thing on it. That came out last year, right? Value. And he also wrote this article in the Globe and Mail. So this is what his career, this is the career span here, right? So Basel III, all of these prominent institutions, Goldman Sachs, Bank of Canada, Bank of International Settlements, Bank of England. It's pretty good. COPA 26 or 7, I don't really remember. And he went, let me tell you about this thing here. They just got this deal settled last November. Now, remember what I said the prefixes would be important? They put together a financing package for ESG investment involving private sector participants, central banks, and large institutions. The number that he got allocated to ESG investment in the future as chair of this thing is 130 trillion. 130 trillion. Okay, that's what he got agreed to at this COPA thing in November, and through the UN and through the Brookfield deal, right? That's his new job. $130 trillion, right, to manage on ESG investments and all that stuff, right? So that's his background, right? So he sounds like a pretty tough guy. Like this is, if we're talking about the final boss in the bank world, I don't know, like he's pretty close, right? He's got all this stuff. So we should be pretty worried about what this guy has to say, right? He's amazing. Like he's got everything. I mean, he's telling you here that I'm going to prevent a run on the banks through my rules. I'm going to preserve the banking system. And then not only that, he's going to, and the stated point of that book, Values, is that all financial decisions, he believes, should go through this environmental matrix of decision making, right? So we put that together, like literally every decision. So he will prevent a bank run and will recalibrate all financial decisions so that ESG is taken into account so that the economy can produce the results that we're all looking for, a healthy, positive world, right? So, but at the same time, he's writing this article in the Globe and Mail, Follow the Money, and is saying that the people protesting in Ottawa, we should actually look into their accounts and seize their money and stop it, right? We should stop them from having money because they're breaking the law, right? So when you hear about him saying that stuff for the environment, he sounds even scarier, right? He sounds like, whoa, this guy is the puppet master, right? He is the puppet master. So should we be afraid of this guy? Is he the final boss? Well, I mean, I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. Let's look at his resume again and find out. Let's do it one more time. But let's put the filter of reality on top of his resume. Let's not use credentialism. Let's not use the 130 trillion press release. Let's not talk about the 500 billion in ESG for a second, or the Basel III Accords. Let's just look at his resume one more time, but with another filter of reality. All right, the preventing the bank run, Basel III Accords. That's the summary of the work that he did all these years, right? All right, well, guess what happened with the Basel III accounting accords? Guess what happened to that? Well, COVID happened. There's no Basel III. It's not happening this year. It's not happening next year. It's not happening the year after. They've pushed it down to 2028 now for the banks to report on their capitalization and liquidity requirements, to have it public and so we all know, right? Is that going to happen? Is 2028 going to be the year that we finally get to Basel? It was supposed to be 3 years ago, then COVID happened, right? It was supposed to be last year. It was supposed to be this year. My whole thing to end Mark Carney, right? My whole thing to end Mark Carney really is to give him what he wants. He said he wanted Basel III to prevent a bank run. Well, what happens if he does it? Are we going to have a bank run? Probably. That's why we haven't had it, right? So whether we do or don't run Basel III, it almost doesn't matter. Mark Carney is going to be there as the person responsible for the mechanism that will either cause the bank run or delay the bank run, right? There's a way to look at it that way. Now, what about all this ESG environmental stuff, right? The 130 trillion. He wrote a speech that was published called 50 Shades of Green, the ESG thing. He's got the Brookfield, all that stuff, right? Now, the new risk management matrix that he put in this book, Values, right, has new valuations about tilting and pushing and rewarding businesses for going carbon neutral this much or not that much, and then you punish them. It's this whole new system, right? So what's he really saying with this whole new system? Well, let's look at what values is, right? I'll describe it in his own words. He says that markets and the tension in markets was an old form of consensus. It's an old form of consensus. He unveiled in his book his new form of consensus so that all our decisions can be made according to his matrix. Listen to what they are. These values, he believes, will drive individuals, businesses, and governments to make better decisions. These are the values. He thinks this is going to be consensus from now on, right? Consensus is solidarity. It's fairness. Give me an ounce of fairness. It's responsibility, right? Resilience, sustainability, dynamism. I think that's how you say it, dynamism. Humility, right? All of these elements, he thinks, are going to be the things we use to measure markets, to measure energy, and to allocate the $130 trillion that has been given to his nebulous order, right? So he's going to get $130 trillion. He's going to run it through this matrix of solidarity, fairness, responsibility, resilience, sustainability, dynamism, and humility. And then that's going to take over Wall Street metrics. That's going to be the new way we measure values, right? So that's the new way. So he has this big plan. He's got all this money. But what's actually going on here? Let's look at the record of these companies. Brookfield, right? What's in Brookfield's $500 billion of stuff, right? Their ESG thing. Well, they've got 70 gigawatts of green energy. 70 gigawatts. What is that? Do you know what 70 gigawatts is? It's like a couple of Bitcoin mines. So for $500 billion, they got a couple of modest big Bitcoin mines. All of Bitcoin is in the 100 terawatt realm, right? It wouldn't even, like, if he took all of Brookfield Asset Management, they could be a bit of a competitive miner. I don't think they'd compete with Foundry or the other largest pools, but they could be around, right? They got a lot of acreage though. You could put on paper that's worth $500 billion if you count the farmland, the companies and their balance sheets and all the other stuff that's there. It's 500 billion. How much does he have in nuclear? I don't know. It's actually zero. They have Westinghouse, right, which is making a small modular nuclear reactor, but they're trying to sell it, right? They don't want it anymore. Not as much of the sustainability and all the other stuff that they're worried about, right? So they want the wind and the solar, not the nuclear. Was there a single word in anything he's written in the 50 Shades of Gray thing? This book that he wrote, Values, is 608 pages. In 608 pages about what the future economy is going to build on, did he ever mention nuclear energy one time? Ever? No. Never. It was a bunch of decisions that we have to make in order to avoid global warming because blah, 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 blah. So my argument remains, if you give this guy everything he wants, make him, let him have it, right? Let him have it. Let him have Basel III, make him successful in that first career. And you can really see the progression of the central bank career here. He went from monetary policy guy to literally every single policy on earth guy, right? That's what happened. He went from monetary to everything. Like, I want all your financial decisions have to run through this. And if you go to Ottawa and protest, well, your bank is going to get shut down, right? So last night he was on, as I said, Tucker, right? He's got 42,000 Twitter followers. Ryan Selkis has 242,000 Twitter followers, right? So the guy with 42,000 Twitter followers, who I might add, had his book come out on a day that I was producing a show around crypto last year. all kinds of people involved. And I said, the book's coming out that day. And I wrote to his publicist. I said, hey, maybe you want to come pitch your book to our large audience. And what did he say? I'm a little busy. So I got to say, well, have fun staying poor, because your book about whatever the future, and you don't mention Bitcoin. Oh, well. And then you also don't mention nuclear energy, right? So here's the thing. I worked in a retirement home when I was a university student. It was a great job because you got to go at lunch and at dinner, and you got a big break. So the seniors would come down to like a dining room. They would dress really nicely, suits and ties actually every night. We'd give them their tea at night, feed them their plates. There was a couple cooks, and then there was a boy and a girl, me and this girl. They wanted a boy and a girl server. They're delightful people. They're all 89 years old, right? But there was a fella there who was probably only in his 50s, and he'd come and talk to this really rich old 90-year-old lady, right? He was kind of like a confidence man. Right? He was running a confidence man scheme, right? He was trying to get friendly with her and get that money, right? That was the whole. I mean, everybody working there knew it. She probably knew it too. I mean, I don't want to mind read her, but my feeling is she understood exactly what was going on. But he was one of these guys, in his 50s, trying to rip off an old lady every day, working at it gently, right? Every day. It's a confidence scam, right? Every day, saying the words she likes, da 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 da. Here's the thing about Mark Carney. I once met him outside of office, right, in Parliament Hill, right where those protests are going right now. And he still had his makeup on from, he just wears makeup all the time. He's on TV a lot. I did a lot of TV in New York and I wore makeup. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Sometimes you just leave the studio and you still have makeup on and you don't notice, right? But that makeup look and the way his eyebrows are trimmed and all the other stuff makes me think of a confidence man. I can't unsee it, right? And especially when I look at the way he's taking this $130 trillion and who gave it to him, right? It's the pension plans. It's all the people that want to hear and actually believe the human mind and Wall Street will be dictated by fairness, humility, and all these sustainability and all these other dynamism, right? Only someone running a confidence scam on some senior citizens could ever think this makes sense. Right? That we're literally going to change the risk assessment of Wall Street to wishy-washy words, right? Is that ever going to happen? There's a non-zero chance, probably even likely, that Mark Carney becomes the greatest financial loser in the history of the world. No one could lose more money than this guy. If you add it up, the delay, the push and the pull, what are we doing with banking? Did we ever respond to the 2008 crisis? What about Basel III? What about the banks? What about liquidity? What about a run on the banks? I don't know. Can we do it? Can we not do it? COVID, we're not sure. Repo market, I don't know. That's where they're at on that, right? That's his whole legacy on that end. So that wasn't really well managed, right? What happens? We'll see. The other part, the $130 trillion of investment for ESG, but what about nuclear? Well, what happens if Bitcoiners buy all these small modular nuclear reactors and they're all over the world, and then no one ever has to think about values with the S and this whole matrix on how to get money into ESG? What if the $130 trillion is just a loss? It's just a loss because they bet on the wrong thing. They bet on a stupid color, green, right? They thought, oh, green's going to come in. We're going to make money. Great. Everyone's going to think like Mark Carney now, right? But what if Mark Carney's wrong? What if he's wrong? I think he's wrong, right? If he's wrong, then he becomes the greatest financial loser ever in the history of the world. And all we have to do is give him what he's asking for. That's it, right? Give him what he's asking for. All right, Mark, give us Basel III. Let's see what happens one way or the other. Will there be a run on the banks or not? Will your thing work? I want to know. I want to know if it's going to work, right? Is it going to save the banks from a run or is it going to cause the run? Let's find out, right? The next part, the ESG piece, right? What happens if nuclear means no one cares about your stupid values and your stupid new matrix for risk assessment and value investing and all that stuff? What if that doesn't catch on? Because I have a feeling it ain't going to catch on, right? No one's going to go. I don't hear anyone on Wall Street saying, I got to redo my whole system here. I got to figure out what's going on. I got to put in Mark Carney's factors of sustainability and all this stuff, of the tilt and the push and all that. What if I don't do it, right? So if you think about Mark Carney in these terms, what do we need to do to beat him? We got to buy nuclear reactors. We got to make nuclear a thing, and we got to make Bitcoin a thing. Those two things happening, pretty good chance of happening. Pretty good chance at this point of happening. would make him the greatest financial loser in the history of the world, bar none, not even close. There wouldn't even be a way to measure it, right? It'd just be the greatest loss ever. So if you're worried about which side to go on, right? What's going on? Mark Carney says, Ottawa, we should hunt these people down. Right? And they say he might even be the next leader after Justin Trudeau. I mean, he's never going to win, right? You would literally need to cheat the whole election for this guy to win, because Globe and Mail isn't going to do it, right? His 42,000 Twitter followers is not going to cut it, right? It's not going to happen. And then he's going to go and pull this change in Wall Street metrics. So from where I'm sitting, Mark Carney, not the guy to follow, maybe the biggest financial loser of all time. And it's a shout out to the bow-tied bull folks who always say that banks are zeros. There couldn't be a bigger one than this guy. So he might just be the chief clown. And I want to just underline my last point on this. When we think about the simulation, we think about clown world, you know, the simulation delivers just beautiful things to us. Isn't it amazing that the guy who runs the clown world is actually named Carney? He's a Carney, that a Carney runs clown world and might be the guy responsible, the poster child for the end of clown world. Carney, the poster child for the end of clown world. It might work, it might hit, it might actually fit. So there you go. That's today's episode of The Breakup.
Awesome. Nolan, thank you for that. I mean, I think the big takeaway from this, and correct me if I'm wrong, the closer you are to the money printer, the more you have to lose. And the decisions that those who frankly control said money printers is going to impact all of us in more ways than just the fiat currency. Are there other people of this ilk? I mean, we talk a lot about Powell here in the States. Are there others you're looking in the same vein as Carney on a global scale that we should all sort of start knowing these people's names?
Well, Carney for sure. I can't really think of any that stand out like he does. He's a particular, you know, there's the big guy. Like, I don't want to do any of the fat shaming, but you know, the guy in Europe, he's really heavy. We see his picture all the time. I don't know much about him, but that's the European bank thing, right? I think they're already done. Like, I don't think there's much about
Augustin Carlson.
Yeah. Powell's only really, I mean, he's not even an economist, right? Powell's not.
He's a lawyer.
Exactly.
He's a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not the same as what I'll say is this. I don't think there's anyone out there with as much cognitive bias as Mark Carney. Because Mark Carney probably thought that letter to the Globe and Mail was a good idea, right? Probably thought, like, I'm going to be prime minister, I'm going to go flex in a major newspaper, and people are going to say, wow, leadership. Yeah, they got, 20,000 people reading it or something. It's nothing. Like, there's nobody there, right? But if you're from that old world and you're running a grift, a confidence scheme on old people, and they're all falling for it because he went to Harvard and he was the captain of the Cambridge or the Oxford or whatever hockey team, all these things, you can impress them a lot. So in this case, I think he's even sincere. I think he really thinks he can change the world. If I'm going to mind read him for a second, he's the guy who looks at Bitcoin and says, I can mine it with my brain. You know what I mean? I could just go and mine this thing. You know what I mean? Like, because he's a smart guy, you know what I mean? Like I'm just talking raw horsepower, right? Just raw horsepower. So when I think of him and all the positions he's been in, to me, the blindness comes from being so good at what he does. Like, I think he really believes he can prevent a bank run. I think he thinks that, right? I think he's able to make enough conditional understanding that if you engineer it this way, if this and this and this and this go right, it'll work. The problem is it's not based in reality. It's like the thing with the ESG and changing your matrix for risk management and changing your system for valuation. I recognize him because I had a job working in a retirement home. I don't think he ever had a job working in a retirement home. I don't think he ever had a job that took into account human behavior. There is no human who's just going to change their operating system because you put it in a book and it's going to be good for the environment in the end. Right? No one's going to do that. Like, Bitcoin admits that we're all sinners, all of us, right? Like, there's no way out of it. You can't just decide to not be a sinner and then we have a healthy world. What you have to do is live with the sin and the trouble and the failings and the shortcomings, and you got to engineer them away. You've got to accept humans for who they are. And that's what's not happened here. I mean, he thinks everyone could be like him, right? If they just went to Harvard, if they just went to here, if they just understood and had the relationship that he has with money, we'd all be fine, right? But unfortunately, I don't think he understands that not everyone can just color their money dynamism, right? It doesn't work. Like, it doesn't work.
I mean, look, I agree in the sense that if I had as much money and access to the printers that Carney does, maybe I would view things differently. But unfortunately, most of the world does not. And quite candidly and frankly, most of the world is not qualified to take a class at Harvard. Sorry, it's true. I'm an asshole for saying it, but
It's true. True.
like you're absolutely right. I mean, you started this segment talking about how much you and your family love life, love everything you have, and are grateful for all that you have. And then you also essentially bookend it by reminding people like, look, life can be beautiful if we choose to view it through that lens, but we also have to recognize the inherent flaws in life, in humanity, and in society. You're absolutely right. Trying to act as though, hey, humans aren't inherently greedy. Try to act as though, oh, humans always act with good intentions. Like, we know history shows us that's actually patently false.
And even worse, even worse, like, you get a lot of people dunking on him today for being a hypocrite, he says he would hunt us down for doing this stuff with money for the protests, but he's doing it for other reasons and for the environment anyway, and so be afraid of him. Well, in my mind, like, a lot of people agree with him, and no one really cares about hypocrisy. Like, I wouldn't have taken this, look at what a hypocrite he is. He's going to turn the power of the state on the people. That's a real fear because of the cognitive bias piece. They might think they're doing it for the betterment of everyone. But that's not the angle that I think is useful to even, deal with these guys. The useful angle is to kind of laugh at them. Like, I mean, it really is, in the same way that the makeup was coming off when I went for that jog and saw him that day there and said hi and chatted, talked about the office and all that, right? The lack of awareness for the world around you and the crutches being used, not talking about nuclear energy, not talking about cryptocurrency, staying on a field where you think you're persuasive if you use words like dynamism and fairness, you know what I mean? And that you'll persuade people with those because they sound good, is more where I'm saying he's lost, right? Like, we don't even have to think about people like that because their chosen avenues of communication are so poor. And I mean, could you read a 608-page book today? I can't. Like, I'm sorry, but my attention span's gone, right? Like, it's nowhere what it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago or anything, right?
I think the most pages I ever read in a day where I think I read one of the whole Harry Potter books. I think it was number 6 in a day. And that's like a 600-page book.
That's a great one.
Harry Potter. So like,
one of the easiest books to read ever. And we're going to talk about Harry Potter in a few days on the show. I've been saving a little Harry Potter story. So little Harry Potter, what was it? Here's the only thing. What was this wand made of? Do you remember?
Unicorn.
And Phoenix, but one more. All wands are made of one material plus a special material.
Is it elm?
Holly.
That's what it is.
All magic
clearly
wands.
I'm not as big of a Harry Potter buff as I thought I was. Wow.
Think about this. All magic wands are made of Hollywood.
That was a good one. That was it. I literally slapped my knee. That was a knee slapper.
We're gonna do it. All right, guys.